via the live stream will be able to see each of us on screen individually. Please announce yourself by name when speaking, and if you want to refer to anything in the officer's report, can you please first clearly state the relevant page number and paragraph number.
Thank you, Leslie. We're ready to start.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everybody to Rochford District Council remote meeting of the Audit Committee, and welcome to anyone watching this via live stream. Agenda item 1. Apologies for absence. Apologies for absence have been received from councillors Tony Carter, Eileen Gadsden, James Gooding, Tracy Knight and Phil Shaw. Are there any others? No.
Councillor Mrs. Laureen Shaw as well, please.
Oh, Councillor Laureen Shaw. Agenda item 2, substitute members. Councillor Christine Mason for Councillor Tony Carter. Councillor Joe McPherson for Councillor Eileen Gadsden. Councillor Arthur Williams for Councillor James Gooding. Councillor Michael Hoy for Councillor Tracy Knight. Councillor Daniel Efty for Councillor Phil Shaw. Yeah. Agenda item 3, non-members attending.
Councillor Mrs. Butcher, we have Councillors Smith and Councillor Wharton in attendance.
Thank you. Agenda item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of September 2021. Are the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of September 2021 agreed, members? I will assume so, unless anyone clicks on the raise hand icon. No. So they are agreed. Agenda item 5, to receive declarations of interest. Members, are there any declarations of interest? No. Agenda item 6, financial statements 2020-2021. Members, we have Debbie Hanson and Hussein Ghulam from the Council's external auditors, Ernst Young, in attendance this evening. Naomi Lucas, Assistant Director Resources, can you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as you've just said, we've got members of EY, Debbie Hanson and Ghulam Hussein here tonight to explain the report in a little bit more detail, but just by way of introduction, the report that you asked to consider tonight provides the preliminary audit conclusion in relation to Rochford District Council's financial statements for the year 2020/21. At the date of the report, EY have substantially completed their audit of the Council's financial statements, and currently they are not expecting there to be any significant matters to report. They are expecting to issue an unqualified audit opinion and a positive opinion in terms of the Council's value for money arrangements. The Council is obliged to prepare an annual statement of accounts, and those have been signed as true and fair by myself earlier in the year, in line with the deadline of 31st of July. Since that time, the financial statements have been available online for public review. As I said, the audit is substantially completed now, but given that there's still some small outstanding matters to conclude, the recommendation in the report tonight is that the Audit Committee delegate further to the Audit Chair to do the final sign-off of the accounts once that audit work is completed, which we are hoping will be before Christmas. So at this point, I'd probably hand over to Debbie to just say a little bit more about the audit process and the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. I will take the report as read by members, and therefore I won't take you through every page of it, which I'm sure you'll be very pleased about. But what I would like to do is really just take you through the executive summary. So members will find that starting, it depends which page numbering you're looking at, but starting on page numbering 6.8 of your pack. If you're using electronic page numbers, that's page 17. So just wanted to update you on some changes in the scope of our audit since we issued our audit plan. So as always, we update our materiality once we get the draft financial statements. We've set out the figures there in a table, which shows you there's been a very small change in the materiality levels that we've set compared to our planning stage, and that's actually increased our materiality. So that doesn't give us any problems in terms of our audit procedures. We also noted that, as in the previous year, we've had to accommodate the impact of COVID-19 and remote working. So we've used screen sharing, Teams, etc., with the council to enable us to gain assurance over the information that's provided to us as part of the audit. So we refer to that as IPE. So we have to undertake procedures to confirm that's complete and accurate, and we've been able to do that successfully. And then we've also identified a couple of other increased risk areas, not significant risk, but areas where we've had to give additional focus to compared to what we reported to in our plan. The first of those is in relation to the recognition of grant income related with COVID-19. And that's because all local authorities have received significant amounts of additional grant funding due to COVID. Some of that is directly for the council's use. Some of that is for the council to pass on to third parties. So that's a kind of agent or principal decision. And that drives the accounting and the accounts. And then other elements of grant income have conditions attached, which again impact on the accounting for that grant income. So because of the volumes involved in that, we've identified that as an additional risk for all of our audits this year. In addition, there's been a new accounting standard which requires auditors to undertake more work around key accounting estimates. So for the council, those estimates are generally around your PPE valuations and also pensions liability valuations. So that has driven some additional work that we've done in those areas. So moving on to the next page, as Naomi said, we have substantially completed the audit. The field work is now, as I said, substantially complete, and we're just working through a review. So I've actually been reviewing the file earlier today. Again, as in previous years, I'm really pleased to note that as at the date of drafting this report and the current date, we haven't identified any differences that we need to bring to your attention, and that's either corrected or uncorrected. There have been some disclosure differences, and I'll just take you on to explain one of those in a little bit more detail in a moment. But overall, again, the accounts have been produced to a very high standard, I would say, with very good supporting working papers, which have enabled us to complete the audit quite efficiently, I would say, once we've started that. So thank you to the finance team once again for all their help. We've noted in relation to value for money that, as outlined in our plan, there was changes to the code this year, which have changed the work we've done around that. We've substantially completed those procedures and again haven't identified any risks or any areas that would impact on the audit opinion. We will need to report to you on the work we've undertaken in that area in greater detail, but we'll do that in the auditor's annual report now, rather than in this report, which is where you would previously have seen any commentary. If I can then just flag to you at the bottom of page 611, one issue that's a slight problem this year, again across all of our local government audits, is that the instructions for the whole of government accounts haven't yet been issued. As a result of that, it means that we are not able to confirm that the council is below the threshold for WGA, which means we cannot issue our certificate to say we've completed all of our statutory responsibilities. So there's no impact from that on the actual audit opinion we issue. It just means we can't issue our statutory certificate, but we will do that as soon as those instructions are issued. If I can then take you on to the meat of the report, so 6.12 is where we highlight the risks that we identified and the status of that work. I won't go through each of the risks, but the work is concluded in all of those areas now. and we haven't identified any significant issues. We have identified some changes we would like made to the going concern disclosures, and that primarily just relates to timing differences. So since the accounts were produced, the council has made some decisions around its subsidiary Green Gateway, and as a result, the disclosures in the accounts in relation to that subsidiary will just need to be updated to refer to that. In relation to the grant income point we referred to, we have identified a few grants where there is a potential misclassification in terms of whether the income should be recognised in the income expenditure account or whether it's a receipt in advance because all of the conditions haven't yet been met. We expect the council will amend for those changes. They're really just sort of classifications, so there's no impact on the bottom line from any of those issues that we've identified. I wasn't proposing to go through in any more detail. As I said, it's been a fairly smooth audit, very few issues to report, but very happy to take any questions or any comments on anything within the report or any other matters.
Thank you, Debbie. So, Chair, I don't know if you want to just open up the up to any questions that anyone may have.
Yes, are there any questions? And thank you, Debbie. Don't see anybody putting their hand up.
I can't find my hand. My hand has disappeared, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay. Councillor Hyde.
Where it is. I noticed Councillor Smith has indicated before me, though.
If that's all right, go ahead,
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I'd just like to say how pleased I am with these findings, and it goes without saying that I hope everyone will be able to agree with that. It's a great reflection on the team that Naomi works with and the team that Naomi leads, and almost as always, she needs to be congratulated on the work that's been produced and independently examined. So I would like to thank her for this. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, thank you. I agree with that. I do have Councillor Dray now before Councillor Hoy.
Thank you, Chairman. Just an observation, really. I note that there are the normal checks and balances in respect of the fraud risk, but is regular updated training given to staff so that they can readily identify fraud?
If I may, Chair, I don't know actually if I might want to. Oh, sorry. I think there's a slight delay. Yeah, I was going to maybe refer to Mike Porter, if that's okay, as our Chief Audit Executive. But yeah, I mean, we do regular training on sort of governance and fraud issues. Obviously, there's some specific areas within the council where that is focused. So in particular in our kind of revenues and benefits team, there's particular officers with responsibility for particularly for fraud detection, and they will have training, but we have some wider training that is delivered across the council as well. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say in terms of that, Michael, Jim.
Yeah, I'm aware the council has a fraud e-learning module, which we're in the process of revisiting, updating, but that's mandatory training for officers of the council. So as part of my role, I will be undertaking a refresh of that e-learning module at some point in time in the next few months, and then rolling that out to staff. And also, you can be assured, as part of our own work, we have a view to fraud as part of all the audit engagements we undertake. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Dray?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Hoy, and it appears your hand's now working.
Yeah, I found it. Thank you. Sorry, I think my dog's about to start howling in a minute, so apologies for that if she does. It's really, I noted the comments saying that it was a very smooth audit. I would probably disagree with that, given that it's been the delays that we've encountered with it, and I think this is now the third delay. I mean, the reasons for this have been explained to me before and in previous years. And just to put this in there, a leader from another council who I saw today did say he was considering asking for money back from their auditors because they're delayed. So I understand this is not just a Rochford issue, it's a national issue. What, in reality, what from our auditor for this year, what should we expect next year and ongoing years? I know it's not just an Ernst & Young problem or an EY problem, and I just would like to get a handle on what our expectations should be in future. We are paying for a service, but the service we get isn't what we pay for because the deadlines aren't met. But I just want a feeling if they think, yes, this is going to carry on until legislation changes or until more people are recruited, are people coming into the audit field for local authorities? I just want a feel if this is going to go on for another 3-4 years, or they think it might be getting better in a couple of years.
Okay. I will answer. I think there's two elements to that question. I'd first of all like to pick up on the point that we're providing a service. We are providing a service, but it's a statutory required service. And although there are timetables that we target, ultimately an audit opinion sign-off cannot be driven by a deadline date, because an opinion can only be issued when it's safe to do so, when sufficient work has been undertaken to issue that opinion. To work it any other way would basically compromise the independence of the audit, which is absolutely crucial to giving you and the members of the public the assurance over the audit opinion. Having said that, I fully recognise that obviously we are not where we want to be in terms of the timetable this year. We had originally scheduled the audit to start much earlier, with the aim of signing off by the end of September. Unfortunately, due to staffing changes, as we note in the audit results report from our side, not from the council side, and also ongoing pressures from delayed 18-19 and 19-20 audits, we had to make the difficult decision to move that audit to be able to resource it properly with an appropriate team and to be able to complete it in a reasonable timeframe. Hence, my comments about the audit having gone smoothly reflect the fact that when we have been able to start the audit with an appropriate team, the audit has gone very well, I think, and the officers have been able to support us as they always do, very positively in terms of responding to queries and providing working papers. In response to your question about what the future holds in terms of the likely timetable for next year, we've put quite a lot of work into scheduling for next year with the aim of completing all of our audits by the end of December. I can't remember exactly where Rochford is in that schedule at the moment. We are trying to obviously pull more of our audits forward, but we recognise that we and other firms cannot move from the position we are now to completing all of our audits by the end of September next year. That is just physically impossible because of the position we are in now. We would normally have been doing our planning before Christmas, maybe sort of doing some walkthroughs and then doing early substantive work in the new year. And we're not in a position to do that yet. So I don't think we'll be normalised by the end of December 22, but I would think that by the end of December 23, we should be back to a normal position, and that is what we're targeting to do. So some normalisation by next year, and I would hope by December 23, things will be back to a more sensible position across all. And as you say, this is not just a Rochford, it's not just an EY position, it's a sector-wide, and it's influenced by a number of factors. And I don't think any of us can ignore the impact that COVID has had on the audits for the last 2 years, both in terms of additional work required, but also the impact of remote working, not being able to sit in the same room as an audit team, and also with your finance team as well. So I think it's been a very challenging time all round in terms of the impact it has on the work that we're undertaking.
Okay,
I don't know if that answers your question, Councillor Horry, if you've got any follow-up to that.
No, that you answered it very well. Thank you.
Thank you. There doesn't seem to be anybody else's hand up for to ask a question. So, members, at paragraph 8.1 on page 6.3, there are 4 recommendations. Item 1 and item 4 are for noting. So I will take those first. Item 1, that the contents of the draft audit results reports be noted. Is that noted, members?
Noted. Agreed.
Noted.
Thank you. Item 4, that the movement in general fund balances be noted. Is that noted, members?
Noted.
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 Thank you. Members, I will move recommendations 2 and 3 from the chair. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Right, number 2, that the financial statements be approved in principle. And number 3, that the final sign-off of the financial statements be delegated to the chairman of the Audit Committee, subject to no significant audit changes being identified post the committee meeting. Are you happy to vote on block for recommendations 2 and 3?
Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed.
Agreed.
I assume that's agreed then. There's no raised icons, so that's agreed.
Chairman, we will need to formally vote on the 2 recommendations, though, please.
Yes, so please unmute yourself now and tell me if you're not able to use the electronic hand. So, members, if anyone would like a recorded vote to be taken, please click on the raise hand icon.
Chairman, I'm raising my hand.
Yes, Councillor McPherson, you want a recorded vote?
No, Chairman, sorry, my electronic hand's not working this evening.
Mine's gone off as
thank
well,
you,
but I can
Councillor
press
McPherson.
Alt and Y and it'll work.
Okay, thank you. Right, so all those, so we're going to do a vote by electronic show of hands, apart from Councillor McPherson and Councillor FD.
No, I can get it working. You press Alt and Y.
All those in favour of the recommendation. You pressing, sorry?
Alt and Y. ALT and Y.
Alt and Y, thank you. So please click on the raise hand icon once.
Chairman, if members can please lower their electronic hands.
It's Alt and Y to lower it as well, Joe.
Thank you. Couldn't see it this end.
So, Chairman, if you could ask people, those that want to vote against, please.
Yes, does anyone want to vote against? Please raise your hand.
Chairman, are there any abstentions, please?
So any against, lower your hand, and those wishing to abstain, please click on the raise hand icon. Right. I understand that is approved. 7-4. No one voted against, and none abstained. Thank you, everybody. Right, we now move to item 7, Audit Progress Report 21-22. Mike Porter, the Chief Audit Executive, will introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Mike.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me. I do seem to have some problems with Zoom with an unstable internet connection, but hopefully you can all hear me. If I can first of all direct members to 7.3 of the agenda pack. Since the last committee in September, the team have completed a further 5 audit engagements. 3 of those engagements received an adequate assurance opinion, and 2 of those engagements we didn't actually provide an opinion as such. If I can deal with those 2 engagements where no opinion was provided, one relates to housing benefits subsidy, where we undertake work on behalf of the external auditor, and that's BDO for housing benefits subsidy. So Jim undertakes a sample of testing whereby we test the accuracy of a sample of housing benefits in payments. That work then feeds into the overall work of the external auditor in terms of their overall assessment of the housing benefit subsidy that we claim back from central government. If we find some errors ourselves, and then that then calls for additional work by the external auditor. And this is a piece of work that we undertake every year on behalf of the external auditor. The other audit engagement that also we didn't provide an audit opinion on was the consultancy piece of work requested by the service department, where we looked at the work of the planning and building control technicians. So with this piece of consultancy work, we were looking at, I suppose, a lean systems type approach. Were there any benefits to be had? Were there any duplication of effort? And both those areas had been subject to a lean review a couple of years ago. So we didn't actually find many areas where the service could be improved. So yeah, I think the overriding issue was probably perhaps a lack of resource in that area, but we couldn't find any areas where there's duplication of effort or things weren't working as we expected it. Coming back to the 3 audit engagements where we provided an adequate assurance opinion, these audits related to car parking, engagement, and also we did some further work around housing benefits. The findings in relation to these 3 pieces of work are provided at Appendix 2 to this report, and that starts at 7.10. Now moving on in terms of dealing with counter-fraud activity. Counter-fraud is basically undertaken by the compliance team within the Revs and Bends service. And as you can see from my report at 7.3, they continue to make considerable savings in relation to council tax and business rates. Moving on, if I may, the last area I'd like to bring to members' attention is the work of service departments in addressing internal audit recommendations. At the moment, we only have 13 live audit recommendations. 7 of those are new recs since the last audit committee in September. All I would add is since the last committee in September, 2 of the recommendations have had their dates revised. I'm quite happy to take any questions in relation to my report.
Are there any questions, members? Yeah, sorry, my computer's going slow with me pressing on things. I don't see anybody wanting to ask a question. So, members, at paragraph 8.1 on page 7.2, there are 3 recommendations which are all for noting. Number 1, that the update on delivering the 2021-22 audit plan be noted. Number 2, that the conclusions and results from completed audit engagements in appendices 2 and 3 be noted. And number 3, that the updated status of audit recommendations in appendix 4 be noted. Is that noted, members?
Noted, Chairman.
Noted.
Noted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I will move on to agenda. Sorry, did somebody say something? No. I will move on to agenda item 8, review of the Council's risk register 2021-22. Naomi Lucas, Assistant Director Resources, will introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. This report presents the 6-monthly review of the Council's risk register, which was last presented to Audit Committee in July 2021. It sets out all the key risks that are faced by the Council, together with the controls that are in place to mitigate those risks, and an assessment of whether each is considered to be high, medium or low risk. This is further supported by service risk registers, which are available on request. The risk on the corporate risk register cover both day-to-day operations and new projects and initiatives that are required to achieve the Council's business plan. So since the last Audit Committee, the leadership team has, as I said, conducted a review of some of the risks which are set out at paragraph 4.5. Of those, the only changes that have been made are to update the level in terms of the adequacy of controls for risk 3B, which is health and safety, which are now considered to be good rather than fair as a result of further improvements in procedures and training across the service areas. However, members will note that that risk is still marked as higher residual risk overall. That is because despite the mitigations that are in place, the impact that a risk in that area could have is still marked as high, which leaves it with an overall scoring of high still. In terms of other risks that have been updated, risk 11 in terms of partnerships has been revised to reflect the contractual elements of the risk and the controls and the risk mitigation plans, which has improved the overall score of those controls to good. The other risks that were reviewed this time around did not result in any updates being made to the corporate risk register. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a few risks that have a higher residual risk rating remaining, of which one of those is health and safety, which I already mentioned. The other 2 that are still marked as high risk are risk 9, which is around balanced budget, which is in common with most of the local authorities. The Council obviously faces significant financial challenges over the medium term. So the overall risk of that is still considered to be high. And the other one is risk 10, which is the inability to recruit or retain staff, which again, although can be mitigated to a degree through the Council's people plan, remains high due to the fact that as a small council, we do sometimes struggle to compete with larger councils and the private sector to recruit and retain staff, so that the residual risk of that remains high. I think that's probably all I draw members' attention to at this point, but obviously happy to try and take any questions if anyone has any. Thank you, Chair.
If you can raise your hand if you've got any questions, please. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple of questions I'd like some further clarity on. I've seen the risk register often, but what has always concerned me about it is that it's very subjective rather than objective. Have the officers attempted, or could they attempt, to see if in some of these areas we could put a more numerical quantity on the impact so that we have some objectivity? I mean, we can put the likelihood is 2, 3 or 4, I can understand that, but it doesn't seem to be very objective. So I have concerns over that, which I know I've expressed some years ago, and it doesn't seem to have altered. I appreciate the difficulty. And the second issue is we have now got 3 areas of high risk, and I realise that there's very justifiable reasons for that, but I wonder what activities are going to be done to get that risk level down. And I'm also concerned to see that all the other risk levels are medium. We've got no low risk, which is a little concerning.
Thank you, Councillor. Mrs Mason. Chair, if I may, I'll try and answer those questions.
Yes.
So if I draw members' attention to page 8.21, which sets out the risk scoring matrix that the officers use in terms of assessing the score of each individual risk, both in terms of the likelihood and the impact of the event occurring. I do take on board that obviously there is an element of subjectivity in terms of determining both the likelihood and the impact score, but the guidelines set out on that page do attempt to give some numerical kind of weighting to those different score levels. For example, in terms of financial risk, there are some ranges of financial cost that would be associated with each risk, which can be used to help identify where each risk should score. So I think that there is obviously, as I say, some degree of subjectivity in terms of that, but the risk scoring matrix is meant to give officers a guide in terms of how they score those risks. In terms of the risks that remain high, as Councillor Mrs Mason said, we obviously do take as many actions as we can to try and mitigate those. In terms of the likelihood of things occurring, we can often take actions to try and reduce the impact. So the one that I referred to earlier in terms of health and safety, obviously the control levels are good, which sort of reduces the likelihood of an event happening. But often what we can't control so much is the actual impacts of if that risk were to occur. So, for example, obviously in terms of setting a balanced budget and the financial risk, if we couldn't set a balanced budget, obviously that remains a kind of high risk for the council. So I think there is obviously a balance to be struck, but we can't necessarily always bring all risks down from high. But yeah, as I say, accept that there is an element of judgment within that. In terms of the risks that remain medium overall, which, as you say, is the majority of them, in terms of how the risk scoring matrix works, unless, again, the likelihood and the impact are both low, it's unlikely that a risk would remain low overall. And in some ways, you could argue that perhaps in those cases, the risk doesn't actually warrant being on the corporate risk register at all. So again, I think that the nature of the risks being strategic and corporate in nature means that probably they are those that we can't necessarily manage down to a very low level, which is why they are on the risk register in the first place. So I hope that sort of provides some context for the questions.
Thank you, Chair. If I can come back, I thank the officer for her clear explanation, and I accept that there is a matrix there, but the matrix itself is, in my view, subjective. So I do remain concerned at the subjectivity of the risk level, but I accept that it's very difficult to take subjectivity out of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hoy.
Thank you, Chairman. On, I think Councillor Mason has asked one of the questions I was going to ask, and I've asked before, so I'll leave that one. I'm just going to a specific point on page 8.11, item 5, about council held data is lost, disclosed or misused to detriment of individuals or organisations as result of inadequate protection. I've asked a question about this some time ago, and it might have been even pre-pandemic, because obviously there's a financial consequence to this as well, which is clearly put out in the report. I have previously asked, have we looked at insurance for such an event? Insurance is available for this, and I want to know if we did look at that or if we haven't got around to it yet, which might be understandable given the pandemic happened in between my question originally and now.
Thank you, Councillor Hoy. Yeah, the quick answer is yes, we have considered it, and we have recently retendered for our insurance provision, yeah, cyber kind of insurance is one of the areas that you rightly say there is some cover available in the market. However, I think there's a bit of a mixed opinion in terms of the kind of actual adequacy of the cover that it can provide. It can't necessarily insure away all risks associated with cyber, and I think a lot of the risk is associated with perhaps some of the reputational and other aspects of such a breach occurring, and obviously potentially, you know, in the worst case scenario, fines from the ICO, etc. And I think in most cases insurance wouldn't cover those, and it will potentially cover some of the direct costs of getting systems back up and running. So our broker kind of didn't necessarily recommend that we took out that insurance policy at this point. It's not something we've definitely taken off the table in terms of future considerations, but I think there is a bit of a mixed opinion amongst councils about whether that cover can actually provide value for money in terms of the coverage it would pay out if such an incident were to occur. So we have made an informed judgment that we chose not to take it out at this time, but I wouldn't rule out considering it again in the future. Thank you.
If I just may come back very quickly on that one, have you looked at the risk register and if it changes if you did take out the insurance, and if you, is that why you have decided not to, because you've done that exercise?
Yeah, so I suppose it's a bit of a two-way street. We obviously made a sort of broad-based risk assessment of the value of the insurance policy. I mean, you could argue that if we took it out, it would, you know, provide another level of control, which potentially could bring the score down slightly. Obviously, that's a judgment call in terms of the cost that is associated with that as well. As I said, I think the wider risks around a breach of that nature would potentially be some of the reputational risks and fines, etc., and which insurance itself can't really cover. So I think the impacts on the scoring would probably be reasonably limited.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are you happy with that, Councillor High?
Yeah, no, I'm happy with that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Milne.
My question is just really about risk assessments and the kind of methodology of it. Obviously, we have a kind of background of incident rate, so if something occurs, we can log that. And obviously, there are different forms of risk. So when you talk about a matrix, I'm not at all sure how this works in practice, because some of it can be subjective opinion. Other things can be based actually on double entry bookkeeping and other things and checks. But when we talk about a matrix, a risk can affect the organisation, can affect individuals and so on. So what I'd like to ask you really is there somewhere where we can get some detail of actually how this process operates, or is it more subjective and then we make notes about it in specific areas? That's I mean, it's not so easy as a risk assessment that a building might fall down if you slam the door, and who would be at risk. It's not quite like that. So when it occurs to me that obviously if the methodology is good, it enables you to set a strategy to correct things, which you're obviously trying to do. I know part of this is probably a training issue and partly procedure, but I've got a little bit interested in this, so I'd you know, I realise you probably won't be able to give a full answer tonight, but is there somewhere we can look and actually look at this area, because it's you know, it is an interesting area, and it can, if it goes wrong, cause quite concerning effects. And that's all my question is, really.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Milne. Yeah, so the council does have a risk framework that it operates within, and that was reviewed probably 2 or 3 years ago now, in conjunction with one of the council's insurers, Zurich, who came in and did an independent review and did carry out some training and sort of help facilitate the refresh of the council's corporate risk register. I think that is due for another refresh probably over the coming year. So we are intending to carry out another review of the corporate risk management processes to obviously try and move us along the kind of maturity curve, if you like, in terms of where we are in risk management. So we probably will be bringing in some independent facilitators to help us with that exercise again. And I believe that we will be bringing back a report to Audit Committee later in the year to update members in terms of what that looks like. So hopefully that sort of provides a bit of assurance to you in terms of the how we've sort of got to where we are at the moment, and the fact that it is kind of regularly reviewed. And if there are significant changes in terms of the way we use our risk matrices as part of that process, obviously that would be brought to members' attention, and we would detail that in the reports.
It'd be interesting to see how that kind of operates, not to be intrusive about it, you know, but it's just particularly of interest to this committee, because you always feel you're not totally empowered in audit, because you've got not all of us are expert accountants and so on. So it's just from that point of view. But that's yeah, thanks for that. And I mean, I could look forward possibly to having a look at that later, perhaps next year. You know,
I mean, possibly it's something that could be put onto members' training sort of requirement list, if you like, and we could run a session particularly on that, probably after we've done the refresh, if that is a particular area of members' kind of concern that they'd like some specific training on that area.
Yeah, thanks very much.
All right, thank you. There doesn't seem to be any further questions. So I'll carry on at paragraph 13.1 on page 8.3. There is one recommendation, that the content of the corporate risk register for 2021-22 be noted. Is that noted, members?
Noted.
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 That's noted. So that concludes the business for this meeting. Thank you all for attending the meeting. Thank you. I'd like to thank the internal auditors for all their hard work. The meeting is closed at 20:20, and I wish all and everyone